He cut his microphone cord by accident, and somehow that one small act of incompetence became the first honest moment in a room built entirely on lies. Have you ever walked into a place so far above your pay grade that you could feel the air itself judging you? That was Maren Cole on a Tuesday evening in late October, standing in the ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Boston, holding a tangle of audio cables she did not fully understand, wearing a black uniform that belonged to someone else. She was a last-minute hire. The regular sound technician had called in sick an hour before the Alderton Foundation Gala, and Maren had gotten the job because her friend Becca knew a guy who knew the event coordinator, and Maren needed the $400 badly enough to say yes to anything. She was 26 years old, 3 months behind on her student loan payments, and the proud owner of a cat named Biscuit, who ate better than she did. She was not supposed to be someone anyone noticed at this party. Then the cable snapped loose from its housing. The podium microphone died mid-sentence, and the man standing at that podium turned to look at her with the patience of someone who had never once been interrupted in his life. Stay with this story because it is not about the moment everything went wrong. It is about what happened after. Like this video, comment where you are watching from, and let us begin. Rowan Dace did not raise his voice. That was the first thing Maren noticed. Every other man at that kind of event, in her experience, would have made a face, would have sighed for the room to hear, would have turned embarrassment into spectacle. They simply stopped speaking, looked at Maren with dark, level eyes, and waited. The room waited with him. Maren's hands moved faster than her brain. She traced the cable, found the loose connection, pressed it back into its housing, and tapped the microphone twice. It came alive with a soft thump. She stepped back without looking up. Dace returned to his remarks as if the silence had been planned. His voice was low and even. He spoke about urban housing investment, about the Foundation's new initiative in Roxbury and Dorchester. He used words like systemic and legacy without sounding like he was reading them off a wall. He had the practiced calm of a man who had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than volume. Maren spent the rest of the event coiling cables in the back corner and trying not to look at him again. She failed. After the speeches, during the cocktail portion when the catering staff circulated with tiny food that cost more than her electricity bill, Maren was repacking the equipment case near the service corridor. She did not hear him approach. That was unsettling for a man that size. "You are good under pressure," Dace said. Maren looked up. He was closer than she expected, and he had exchanged his podium formality for something quieter. His jacket was still on. His tie was still straight. But the audience was gone, and his face had dropped whatever it wore for rooms like that. "I knocked out your microphone," she said. "That is the opposite of good under pressure. You fixed it in 12 seconds. Most people would have frozen. I have a cat who knocks things off counters, faster reflexes." Something moved across his expression, not quite amusement, more like recognition. Maren went back to the cable case. She could feel him still standing there. "I don't usually lose the room," Dace said. She looked up again. He wasn't looking at her like men at events like this usually looked at hired staff. He was looking at her the way she sometimes looked at a spreadsheet that did not add up. Like she was a problem he could not categorize. "I don't usually cause power outages at charitable galas," she said, "so we are both off our game tonight." He almost smiled. She could see it at the corner of his mouth before he stopped it. "Rowan Dace," he said. She knew the name. She did not say so. "Maren Cole." He nodded as if filing it. Then he said, in a tone so ordinary it was strange, "I hope the rest of your evening is uneventful." He walked back toward the room. Maren stared at the empty service corridor for a long moment. Then she finished packing the case and told herself she would never see him again. She was wrong within 48 hours. Her regular job was at a medical billing company in Cambridge. She sat in a cubicle, cross-referenced insurance codes, and caught errors other people missed because she had the kind of brain that noticed when numbers did not behave. It was not glamorous. It paid the minimum required to keep her in the city she loved. On Wednesday morning, she was 3 coffees in and halfway through a batch of disputed claims when her desk phone rang. An assistant's voice told her that Rowan Dace's office was calling. She assumed it was a billing issue. Mercer Medical Group, which she occasionally processed claims for, had a financial arm connected to Dace Properties. She pulled up the account. Nothing flagged. The assistant transferred her. Dace picked up himself. Miss Cole. She sat straighter without meaning to. Mr. Dace. I have a coordination problem. My events team is short a production lead for a donor dinner in 3 weeks. You were recommended. By whom? She almost asked. Instead, I'm a billing analyst. I borrowed a friend's credentials to run sound at the gala. A pause. I know. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then why are you calling me? Because you solved her problem in 12 seconds without asking anyone for permission, and you didn't apologize for the problem you caused. You apologized for the result. He paused. That's rare. Maren looked around her cubicle at the motivational poster someone had taped above the printer in 2019 and never removed. She looked at the stack of disputed claims that would take her until Friday. She thought about the $400 from Tuesday night, which she had already mentally spent. I don't know how to run a donor dinner, she said. You know how to stay calm when something breaks. That's harder. She should have said no. She said she would think about it. She called Becca that evening from her apartment, sitting on the floor while Biscuit walked across her laptop with the confidence of someone who paid rent. Rowan Dace called you, Becca said, personally. Apparently. Maren, do you know who he is? A man who speaks at galas. Becca made a sound like a tire losing air. His family built half of South Boston in the 70s. Not legally. His father was Vincent Dace. The city still argues about whether Vincent Dace was a civic visionary or a career criminal who never got caught with enough paperwork to prove it. Rowan has been trying to clean it up for 15 years. Maren looked at Biscuit. Biscuit looked back with the neutrality of an expert witness. He seemed normal, she said. Dangerous men usually do. That is the whole point. After they hung up, Maren made tea she did not drink and sat at her kitchen table and thought about the way he had looked at her in that service corridor. Not with hunger, not with authority, with curiosity. Like she had said something in a language he had been trying to learn. She called back the next morning and said yes. The donor dinner was at a private club in Back Bay with the kind of hush that money buys when it has been old long enough to stop apologizing. Maren arrived 2 hours early because anxiety and punctuality had been roommates in her brain since childhood. She wore the only blazer she owned, which was navy, and had a pulled thread on the left cuff she had taped down before leaving the apartment. Dace arrived 40 minutes before the guests with 2 staff members who moved like they were on a timer. He wore charcoal. He always seemed to wear charcoal. He noticed her immediately. You look like you're preparing for testimony, he said. She looked down at her blazer. I look professional. You look braced. She met his eyes. You look like you've done this 600 times. Give or take. Then we balance out. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to his staff and the evening began. She spent the first hour learning names and seating arrangements, the second hour managing a floral delivery that arrived wrong and a sound system that threatened to repeat Tuesday's disaster. She fixed it herself, because apparently that was becoming a pattern. By the time guests arrived, she had memorized the room well enough to move through it without looking like she was moving through it. Dace caught her eye once across the dining room. She gave him a small nod. Everything was under control. He gave her a nod back that felt like more than professional acknowledgement. After the dinner, when the staff was clearing and the last guests had drifted toward the lobby, Dace came to find her near the service entrance. He was carrying his own jacket. That detail seemed important, though she could not say why. You anticipated the florist, he said. I called ahead and verified. Basic protocol. My events manager has never done that. Your events manager should find a different job. His mouth curved. That almost counts as a smile. She buttoned her bag. Mr. Dace, why did you really hire me for this? He considered the question the way men usually only considered questions about money or strategy, because I wanted to see if Tuesday was a pattern or an accident. She looked up. And? Pattern, he said, unambiguously. She walked out into the cold Back Bay night and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with the sounds of the city around her. Horns. A train somewhere beneath her feet. Wind pushing around the corner of old brownstone buildings. She told herself she was not interested. She told herself the thread on her left cuff had probably come loose again, and that was the kind of thing that should concern her. She was back in his building the following week, not for an event. He had called her billing company about a disputed claim on a construction contractor account, and the call had been routed to her because she had flagged the account 3 months earlier. She sat across from his CFO in a conference room on the 14th floor and walked through the discrepancy without notes because she had read the file twice on the train. 40 minutes later, the CFO agreed that the billing error belonged to a subcontractor's insurance intermediary, not to Dace Properties. Maren packed up her folder. On her way out, the elevator opened and Dace was in it. He looked at her, then at the folder. "Billing dispute," she said. "I know. Harlan called me." She stepped in. The doors closed. The city fell away below the glass wall and Boston stretched out in November gray and harbor light. "You didn't have to come down here yourself," he said. "It's my account." She paused. "Was my account. I'm being pulled off it. Conflict of interest, apparently. Because of Tuesday. Because of Tuesday and the dinner and the fact that someone in HR found your LinkedIn connection to my temporary employee file." He looked at her with something careful in his expression. "I'm sorry. I've had accounts pulled before. It's not personal. This one is." She stared at the elevator numbers. "It is not possible for a company policy to be personal." "Maren." His voice saying her name did something inconvenient. She had noticed it before and chosen not to examine it. Now in an elevator with nowhere to look, she examined it. The doors opened. She walked out. He followed, not chasing, keeping pace. "Let me buy you coffee," he said. That was not an order. "I have 3 more accounts to process before 5. I have a meeting in 12 minutes. She stopped at the lobby door. "That doesn't sound like a plan." "Tomorrow," he said, 7:30. "There's a place on Newbury Street. You choose." She thought about Becca's voice. Dangerous men usually do. She thought about the pulled thread on her cuff and her student loans, and Biscuit's food and the fact that her bank account had not had 4 figures in it since March. She said the name of a diner on Com Ave where the coffee came in paper cups and the booths had duct tape repairs and nobody would recognize either of them. He did not write it down. He found it. He was already there when she arrived, which suggested either he was pathologically early or he had been anxious, and neither option seemed to fit the man she thought she understood. He had ordered coffee. Plain. He pushed a second cup toward her when she sat down. She looked at the cup. "You ordered for me." "You said coffee." "I ordered coffee." "You don't know how I take it." He slid a small container of creamers across the table. "I left the variables to you." She unwrapped 2 creamers and poured them in. He watched without comment. "You grew up in this city," he said. "Cambridge. You." "South Boston. Different world." She thought about what Becca had told her. About Vincent Dace and union leverage and city contracts and men who built neighborhoods by controlling them. She thought about how Rowan Dace sat facing the door in a diner where no one knew his name. "You count exits," she said. He stilled. "Every room I've seen you in, you know where the doors are before you know anything else." His expression did not change much. "Enough. Old habit." "That sounds lonely." He looked at her across the cheap table with the chipped laminate and the paper cups. "It can be." For a moment, neither of them moved. The diner was loud around them. Someone argued with a television above the counter. A child banged a fork against a high chair. The city did what cities do, which is refuse to pause for anything. Maren wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Your father." She had not planned to say it, but she had also learned that circling a problem never solved it. Dace looked at the window. Rain was starting against the glass. "What about him?" he said. "I read about him, before the dinner, so I would know what room I was walking into." That was smart. It was self-preservation. He nodded. "Same thing, usually." She waited. She had learned that some people needed the silence to decide whether they trusted you enough to fill it. "My father believed in leverage," Dace said finally. "Not money. Leverage. Who owed whom? Who needed what? Who could not afford to say no?" He built an empire on the distance between what people needed and what they were willing to admit. His voice was flat. "I grew up learning how to read that distance in every person I met." And now? Now I spend a lot of time unlearning it. She looked at him. That is not the same as having unlearned it. No, he said, it is not. There it was, the honest edge beneath the controlled surface. She should have leaned away from it. She leaned toward it instead, not physically. Something in her attention moved closer. They stayed for 90 minutes. They talked about the city, about the billing system she had redesigned at her company without being asked, about the fact that she named her cat after a breakfast food and had no apology for this. He did not laugh loudly. He laughed the way people laugh when something surprises them. A short, unguarded sound, and it changed his face into something that made him look like he had been somewhere warmer once. Outside after the rain had turned serious, they stood under the diner awning. She said, I don't do well with men who make decisions for other people. He said, I'm aware. I mean it. I know you do. That is part of the problem. She looked at him. What problem? His eyes moved over her face in that way he had, like he was reading something that kept changing. You are very difficult to manage. I am not yours to manage. No, he said, that's the problem. She took the train home in wet shoes and told Biscuit everything. Biscuit purred once and walked away, which was honestly the most supportive response available. 3 weeks passed. Dace did not call. That should have resolved the question. It made the question louder. On the 4th week, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken. That was the thing that made her hands shake. Her laptop was there, her camera from her photography phase, a small envelope of emergency cash in her underwear drawer, all of it untouched, but her desk had been gone through. Her files, the paper copies she kept of disputed billing accounts, old and new, because she was the kind of person who printed things and organized them in labeled folders, because she did not trust cloud storage with anything that mattered. One folder was missing, the Dace Properties subcontractor file she had been pulled from 3 months earlier. She sat on her kitchen floor with Biscuit in her lap and thought very carefully about what that meant. Then she called Dace. He picked up on the first ring. Someone came into my apartment, she said. They didn't take anything except a billing file. Your file. His voice went quiet in a way that was different from calm. Are you hurt? No, I wasn't home. Are you home now? Yes, with new locks and a kitchen knife I am aware does not constitute a security plan. He exhaled slowly. I'm sending someone. No. Maren. No, she said. I am not going to be managed. I am going to tell you something, and then you are going to tell me the truth. A pause. All right. The file they took. The subcontractor billing irregularities I flagged. I kept copies of those because I flag things for a living and I do not let discrepancies disappear just because someone reassigns my account. She breathed. What is in those files that someone wanted badly enough to come into my home? The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Probably the same thing I've been trying to find for 6 months, Dace said. His name. She did not say it as a question. Gerald Shea, he said. She recognized the name from the subcontractor chain. A logistics consultant attached to 3 of Dace Properties' urban development contracts. She had flagged his invoices because they were too clean. Numbers that were too clean usually meant someone had cleaned them. He's been running ghost billing through my subcontractors for 2 years, Dace said. Skimming from public funding tied to city development grants, slowly, patiently. Enough to matter, not enough to trigger automatic audits. She stood up. Biscuit protested. She moved to the kitchen table and sat down and opened the mental file she kept of everything she had read about that account. He's using your legitimacy as cover, she said. Yes. And if it surfaces, it looks like it comes from you. Yes. She opened her laptop. You need someone who understands the billing structure well enough to trace the whole chain. I have accountants. Do your accountants know what I flagged? Another pause. No. Then your accountants are looking at a clean version of the records. She pulled up the local copies she had stored the night she had been reassigned, because she did not trust reassignment, and she did not trust Gerald Shea's invoices, and she had learned to trust her instincts about both. I still have the original flags, before anyone touched them. Dace was quiet for a moment. How long would you need? To map the full structure? She looked at the files on her screen. A week. Maybe less if you can get me access to the construction draw records from the city contracts. He made a sound that might have been disbelief and might have been the beginning of something else. You're not afraid of this. I am completely afraid of this. I am also the only person who knows where the pattern started. Those are not mutually exclusive. 2 of his staff arrived within the hour. She let them check the apartment because the broken lock was a real problem, even if the principle of it frustrated her. She did not leave with them. She stayed at her kitchen table until midnight, with her laptop open and biscuit asleep on the cable and a pot of coffee going cold beside her. She found the second layer at 11:47, a billing address in Quincy that appeared under 4 different company names across 3 different contracts. The registered agent for all 4 was a property management firm that did not have a website, only a phone number that rang to a voicemail box with no greeting. She searched the address. Then the address connected to a name. Then the name connected to a city inspector. Then the city inspector connected to a series of permits issued for Dace Properties projects, all approved without on-site visits. She sat back. Someone was not just stealing money. Someone was building a mechanism that could shut every one of those projects down at will. She did not sleep. By 6 in the morning, she had printed everything, organized it by account, by date, by dollar amount, and by the thread that connected Gerald Shea's ghost vendors to the inspector's office, to 3 city council members who had received campaign contributions from a PAC that traced back through 2 levels of non-profit structure to a man named Harold Fenn who had lost a city development bid to Dace Properties 4 years ago. At 7, she called Dace. "I need you to come to me," she said. "Bring your lawyers and coffee, a lot of coffee." He arrived in 40 minutes with 2 attorneys and a cardboard carrier from the place on Newbury Street. He looked at her kitchen table, which had become a topographical map of financial fraud. He looked at her, still in yesterday's clothes, hair up in whatever a pencil and desperation could hold. "Did you sleep?" he said. "That is not the first question you should be asking right now." He set down the coffee. "What is the first question?" She pointed to the paper in the center of the table. "Harold Fenn. Do you know that name?" His expression changed. "Yes." She thought so. She told him what she had found. All of it in order, without edits, because she had learned that the truth needed to be complete to be useful. The lawyers took notes. One of them looked increasingly pale. The other looked increasingly focused, which was more helpful. Dace listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "When did you find the Fenn connection?" "Around 4 in the morning." He stared at her. She stared back. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table, in the same chair he might have taken if he had come for dinner, which she had not, which she noticed now in the way you notice things you have been avoiding noticing. She slid the organized file toward him. "You do not respond by moving against Shea directly. He is expecting that. Fenn is expecting that." He looked at the file. He looked at her. "What do I do?" "You go to the city auditor. Voluntary disclosure before Fenn's inspector triggers anything. You submit a report identifying irregular billing tied to Shea's vendor chain. You make it boring. Boring moves faster through regulatory channels than drama does, and it is much harder to turn into a headline." The quieter lawyer said, "That's counterintuitive." "That is why it works." Dace's eyes did not leave her face. "And Fenn. Fenn loses his mechanism. His inspector is exposed by your own disclosure. His PAC contributions become part of a public record audit. He went to a lot of trouble to frame you from the inside. When you reveal the frame yourself, you become the victim of fraud, not the perpetrator." Dace was quiet. One hand rested on the table, relaxed, though she had learned to read the tension underneath. "You mapped this in one night." "I have been trained to see patterns in numbers since I was 22. I have been ignoring this one for 3 months because someone reassigned my account." She looked at him. "Don't reassign people who find things." He held her gaze. "I won't." The disclosure process took 6 weeks. Maren submitted her analysis as a formal third-party consulting report because Dace's lawyer suggested it and because it put her findings on record in a way that protected both of them. Gerald Shea stopped answering his phone on the 4th week. By the 5th week, the city audit office had flagged 3 of his vendor accounts. By the 6th week, Harold Fenn's inspector had quietly resigned. She watched it happen from a distance. She had gone back to her billing cubicle because the consulting engagement had technically been temporary, and she had rent to pay, and Biscuit had developed a preference for the expensive food, which she blamed entirely on the stress of the break-in. Dace texted once, "The disclosure is filed. Thank you." She texted back, "Send the invoice to your lawyers." He called instead of texting back. "I'm not treating this as a transaction," he said. "I am. It protects us both. Maren." There it was again, her name in his voice. She sat in her cubicle with her hand around her phone and stared at the disputed claims on her screen. "You live in a world where things happen to people because of who they stand next to. I am a billing analyst in Cambridge who names her cat after pastries. Those worlds don't usually end well when they overlap." "They overlapped before I decided anything about it," he said. "I know. I'd like to see you. Not as a consultant. Not in a conference room." She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "Where?" "Wherever you choose." She chose a small Portuguese restaurant in Somerville, where the lighting was bad and the food was honest and nobody cared who anyone was. He arrived in jeans, which she had not seen before. He looked like a man who had given himself permission for one ordinary evening. She noticed. She did not say so. They ate without strategy. That was new for both of them. He told her about the housing projects his foundation funded, not with the polished language of a Gala speech, but with the specific, complicated truth of a man who knew how badly things had gone wrong once, and wanted them to go right now, and understood that wanting was not the same as managing. She told him about her father, who had been a public school math teacher and had died of something fast and unfair when she was 23, and how she had learned to make numbers behave, partly because he had loved them, and partly because grief needed somewhere to go. He listened the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak. After dinner, they walked along the river. November had turned mean, and the wind off the water had opinions. He did not offer his coat. He asked, quietly, if she wanted it. She said no. She meant yes. He gave it to her anyway and kept his hands in his pockets after. That restraint, she thought. That was the thing about him. He was a man shaped by control, and he had chosen, somewhere along the way, to aim it inward instead of outward. It was not finished work. She could see the places where the old habits pressed against the new ones, but he was trying in a direction she recognized. They stopped on the bridge. Below, the river moved dark and unhurried. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I think you should know that before anything else." "I know," he said. "My instinct is to keep things separate, my work, my life, what I let people close to. I understand that. I'm saying I would choose wrong before I would choose compromised." Rowan looked at her with the quiet that she had learned was not blankness but attention. "I wouldn't want you to choose anything else." She believed in. That was the uncomfortable part. She told herself it was too soon. She told herself she was practical. And practical people did not walk into complicated situations with their eyes open and expect it to be simple. She told herself Biscuit needed her to be sensible. Then she told herself the truth, which was that she had felt invisible for most of her adult life in rooms that looked right through her, and this man had seen her in a service corridor holding broken cables in the dark, and looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. She was not going to pretend that meant nothing. They met for dinner a second time. Then a third. She learned that he drank black coffee and took notes by hand, and had a younger brother who called him by a childhood nickname he refused to share. He learned that she kept a running list of billing errors she had caught organized by dollar amount, that she had never left Massachusetts, and that she could tell when produce had been incorrectly invoiced to a restaurant by looking at the menu. "I'm going to have you review every vendor contract I have," he said one evening. "That sounds like a job offer." "It is." She set down her fork. "I am not going to be your in-house anything. I have my own practice starting in the spring. Small businesses, non-profits, people who need someone to read their books and tell them the truth." He looked at her. "Since when?" "Since I realized the problem with working inside a large company is that someone can always reassign your account." He was quiet. His jaw moved once. "That was my fault." "Yes. I handled it badly." "Yes. Maren." He put down his own fork. I am trying to tell you I was wrong. I know. I accept the apology. That does not make me want a corporate role. That's not what I'm offering. His voice shifted. I'm saying I would like to send clients to you. People who need what you do. Not as a favor, because you're good and you should be doing it. And I should have figured out how to make room for that from the beginning instead of folding you into something that was convenient for me. She looked at him across the table. That is the most useful apology I have ever received. Is it enough? It's a start. His office sent her 3 referrals the following week, then 2 more. One was a family restaurant in Chinatown whose accountant had been submitting inflated deductions for 4 years. She found it in a day and a half. The owner cried. Maren bought her coffee and explained the correction process in plain English and did not charge for the extra hour. She told Dace about it that evening on the phone. He said, "You're exactly what I thought you were." She said, "What does that mean?" "Someone who gives a damn about the right things." She stood at her kitchen window with Biscuit on the sill beside her and the lights of Cambridge going amber in the early dark. "Don't make me sound more heroic than I am," she said. "I'm not. I'm describing accuracy." She smiled against the window glass. Annoying habit. "I've been told." By the spring, her practice had 8 clients and a second desk she had bought used from a closing law office and carried up 2 flights of stairs herself. She had a paper sign on the door that she kept meaning to replace. She had not replaced it because it meant something to have written it by hand. Cole Forensic Accounting. Financial Review. Fraud Detection. Small Business Support. Dace came by once in February without announcement. She was not pleased about the without announcement part. She said so. He apologized. Then he stood in the doorway looking at the 2 desks, the wall of printed records from her current cases, the coffee machine that made sounds she could not explain, and the small lemon tree in the corner window that he had sent 2 weeks earlier without asking. She had kept it because the light in that corner was good and because she was still negotiating with herself about what that meant. He said, "It suits you." She did not look up from her screen. The tree was a calculated move. "I sent a tree, not a building. Don't give yourself ideas." He laughed. She had come to recognize the real version of it, short, undefended, a little surprised at itself. He stayed for an hour and read through a contract dispute she was working on and caught a clause she had missed. She did not thank him with more than 2 words. He did not require more than 2 words. In March, he asked her to accompany him to a development funding presentation at City Hall, not as a companion, as the forensic consultant who had identified the billing fraud that the presentation would reference in its transparency report. She said, "You want me to stand in that room?" "I want the room to understand what the work looks like," he said. "You are the work." She went. She wore her navy blazer with the pulled thread repaired. She stood in a room full of city officials and foundation directors and spoke for 11 minutes about billing irregularities, vendor chain accountability, and the difference between paperwork that performed honesty and paperwork that was honest. She did not use jargon. She did not apologize for being the least powerful person in the room. Rowan Dace stood at the side of the presentation space the whole time, not beside her, not behind her, across from her where she could see him as she needed to. She did not need to, but she noticed where he had positioned himself and she understood it, and that understanding did something quiet and permanent in the way she thought about him. Afterward, in the parking structure, he said, "You didn't need the room." "I never do. That is different from knowing how to use it." He looked at her. "Every time I think I understand how you work, you add something." "That is the point of people," she said. "You don't finish understanding them." He took her hand. She let him. They stood between parked cars in a Boston parking structure in cold March light, and she thought about all the rooms she had walked into sideways, all the spaces she had tried not to take up, all the versions of herself she had kept small to avoid inconveniencing anyone. She did not feel small. She felt exactly the size she was supposed to be. That fall, Gerald Shea was formally indicted on 16 counts of wire fraud and public contract manipulation. Harold Fenn settled a civil suit that cost him considerably more than the development contract he had lost. The city inspector's office reorganized under a new director who had, according to Becca, hired 3 people from Maren's professional network in the first 6 months. Becca said, over the phone from San Francisco, where she had recently relocated. You basically restructured a municipal corruption ring through billing analysis. I caught a pattern, Maren said. Other people restructured things. Don't be modest. It's unbecoming. I'm accurate. It's different. There was a pause. Becca's voice went quieter. Are you happy? Maren was at her desk. Late afternoon. The lemon tree was still alive, which she had decided to take as a sign of something. Through the window, the neighborhood was going amber and ordinary in the October light. I'm honest, she said. I think that might be the same thing. She and Rowan did not get married quickly. They were not people who moved quickly. They argued about his tendency to pre-solve problems she had not asked him to solve, and her tendency to process everything alone until she had an answer and did not need him anymore. They argued about his security team and her independence, and the way he sometimes looked at a room before he looked at her in it. They learned each other's worst versions and stayed anyway, which was harder than the easy parts and more useful. His foundation funded 3 of her pro bono cases in the second year of her practice, which she only accepted after establishing that she controlled the scope, and they had nothing to do with his personal investments. She sent him invoices for everything else. He paid them without comment and left the tip line blank, which had become their private language for, I trust you to name what it's worth. On a night in late autumn, 2 years after a microphone went silent in a Back Bay ballroom, they stood in that same ballroom during a private reception. The room was different without the crowd. Smaller, more honest. Old chandeliers casting the kind of light that forgave everything. She stood at the edge of the room where the service corridor began, where she had crouched over cable housing in a borrowed uniform and decided that 12 seconds was enough time to fix what was broken. He came to stand beside her. You're thinking about that night, he said. She was. I thought I was invisible. You were not even close. She looked at the empty room, the borrowed uniform, the $400, the billing account she was 3 weeks away from flagging. She thought about the shape a life made when you followed what you were good at into places you were afraid of. I was going to pay rent with what I earned that night, she said. I know. Now I have a tree you sent me, and a practice with 11 clients and a cat who has started ignoring you specifically. He smiled. Biscuit standards are very high. She turned to look at him. Her voice went quieter. Why me? He did not answer the way she expected. He said, because you walked into my room and the first thing you did was fix what was broken and the second thing you did was refuse to apologize for breaking it. He paused. I had forgotten what that looked like. Someone who just does the work. She took his hand. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Horns and trains and wind off the harbor and 1,000 ordinary people moving through their lives without knowing that in a ballroom above them, a woman who had spent most of her life trying not to take up too much space had finally stopped trying. The work was hers, the room was hers, the lemon tree was a write-off she had not yet decided whether to report. And beside her, the man who had inherited a kingdom built on leverage was learning, one chosen day at a time, what it meant to build something that did not require anyone else's fear to stand. I've thought a lot about the moment Maren walked into that ballroom. Not the part where she fixed the microphone, the part before it, when she was just a woman in a borrowed uniform holding cables she barely understood, telling herself she only needed to get through the night without causing a disaster. She had no idea she was already the most capable person in the room. That's the thing about people who spend years making themselves small. The smallness becomes the story they carry everywhere, even into rooms where it was never true. What I keep coming back to is cause and effect. Not luck, not fate. Every outcome in Maren's life was a direct result of something she chose to do or refused to stop doing. She flagged Gerald Shea's invoices not because anyone asked her to, but because something in the numbers didn't sit right, and she trusted that feeling enough to act on it. That instinct, that refusal to let a discrepancy disappear quietly, is what eventually unraveled an entire fraud network, one decision made in a cubicle 3 months before anyone thought it mattered. I think about integrity a lot when I think about her. Not the word people put on motivational posters, the real version, which is what you do with information when no one is watching and nothing is at stake yet. Maren kept copies of files she'd been pulled from because she believed the truth of a number shouldn't depend on whether the account was still hers. That's not heroism. That's just someone who decided, quietly and without ceremony, that she wasn't going to look away. And then there's the kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself. Maren didn't walk into Rowan Dace's conference room with credentials or leverage. She walked in with 12 seconds of pattern recognition and 4 months of paper she'd kept because her instincts told her to. She built her case the way she built everything, by following the thread past the point where most people stopped looking. That capacity to think clearly under pressure, to trust the logic of a problem even when the problem is frightening. That's what actually changed things, not her connection to a powerful man, her own mind. But what stays with me most is the persistence. The way she kept showing up to her own life, even when the life kept making it difficult. When her account was pulled, she didn't quit the work. When her apartment was violated, she sat at her kitchen table and turned her fear into a filing system. When her boss tried to reduce her to a reputation risk, she walked out and put her own name on a door. None of that was dramatic. It was just one foot in front of the other for a very long time, in the direction of something she believed she deserved. I think we underestimate how much of a life is built from exactly that. Not one grand moment. Just a series of ordinary days where you chose not to disappear. Maren didn't get the life she wanted by becoming someone else. She got it by refusing, one quiet decision at a time, to become any less than herself. That's the part worth remembering.